Hey guys, this is Liz here, and as many of you know, I work with OnOne Software. I am one of the creators of educational materials for OnOne, which means I make videos, tutorials, blog posts, all about using the photo suite and how to use it better. Now, what many of you guys don't know is that I'm also a professional photographer and retoucher on the side, and I absolutely love photography. I always have. My father is a photographer, my mother was an avid artist, and so I was kind of surrounded by visual art for most of my life. Now, I still shoot digital and film, so I've got multiple different cameras at home that I use. Digital tends to be a preference when I'm working with clients, and film tends to be a preference when I'm working on personal projects. So I love the fact that I've got access to both. You can keep up with what I'm doing here at elizabethlepage.com. I have a blog, which you can find up in the top right-hand corner right here, and I'm also a pretty avid user of Instagram and Facebook. So if you want to kind of keep up with what I'm doing in my personal life, you can always find that information here on my website as well. Now, what I want to talk to you guys a little bit about today is something that I don't do very often, landscape photography. Many of you guys probably do not know this about me, but I am not an extremely avid hiker, or really outdoors is a little touch and go when it comes to my lifestyle. I tend to really like things in an urban environment. I like working toilets, and I like having all my stuff, and I like very, very high heels and fancy dresses, and hiking and outdoorsiness doesn't really tend to agree with me very well. My father has become quite a big hiker. My mother was an extremely, extremely awesome hiker. She loved doing it. She was outside all the time, and somehow I completely missed that gene. So one of the things that I've been working on is getting out of the studio and getting away from working with people and trying to play around with landscape photography a little bit more. So I wanted to show you guys some of the stuff that I've been working on recently and show you one of the ways that I like to edit my photos inside the photo suite. So let's go ahead and hide this really quick. I've got my images opened up here inside Perfect Browse. I'm going to be using the program as a standalone today just because I've got all of my images here and it's a lot easier. The new browse is insanely fast, so these previews are going to load really quickly. I can go in and out of different programs like Effects, back to Browse, or into Portrait, and then to Effects. I can do all of that really, really quickly without having to use another application like Lightroom or Aperture. As I mentioned before, not a really big hiker, but unfortunately, I am dating someone who is, and so in many cases on the weekends, we either choose something he wants to do, like hiking, or something like I want to do, which generally falls into the let's go see a movie and go to dinner type of thing. I also really like dancing. So this was a hike that I did very recently with him. He took me to one of his favorite places called Ellowa Falls. If you're ever in Oregon, it's absolutely beautiful. It's a very, very short hike. It's about 3 miles, and it's not as crazy touristy as some of the other big ones like Multnomah Falls, which almost everybody who comes to Portland knows about Multnomah Falls and wants to go there. So if you want something a little bit quieter, a little bit more relaxed, Ellowa is a really good option. Now, these are a couple of the images that I took there. Because I'm not a landscape photographer, I tend not to use a tripod very often. I like to have the camera in my hands. I was a trained film photographer, especially with 35mm and 120, so I was always walking around and moving with my camera, and so working with tripods is still really difficult for me. I just don't understand it. And so a lot of these images are just shot by hand or propping my camera up on a rock and using that as a tripod-like thing. What I want to show you today is how I created this kind of soft matte nature look for these images that you see here. I already edited 2 of them so I could show you the before and afters. This was one of the images that I worked on. This is the original, and here was the after that I created with a preset that I made inside Perfect Effects. Here is another original image and the after that I created in Perfect Effects. Both of these images have the same preset applied to them, and so that's what I'm going to show you how to create today. It's kind of a matte look, but it also has that kind of greenish yellowish glow to it, but you'll also notice that it maintained a lot of detail in the foreground. So you can still see all of the information, all that crispness in the ferns in the foreground of this image, as well as all of the detail that you're seeing on the edges of these leaves here. All of that remains intact, and that's just using special effects inside Perfect Effects. So let me go ahead and open up another image, and I will show you how to create this look. All right, so we are going to select our photo, go up to the top right-hand corner and click on Effects. I'm going to make sure I edit a copy, and we'll go ahead and click OK. Now, once you're inside Perfect Effects, there are two different ways to go about things. On the right is where I usually like to go. It's the Filter Options pane, and in the Filter drop-down menu, these are all of the base filters that you can apply to an image. And by combining multiples of them, you can make a preset like the one that I just showed you. So I know exactly what I'm looking for most of the time, and so I jump right here to the Filter drop-down menu because I don't want to have to go through all the different filter presets. I already know what I'm going to do. If you're like me, you can jump straight to the Filter pane. If you're not, you can jump to the left-hand side to the Filters library, and when you open up any of these categories, for instance, Bleach Bypass, you're going to get little previews of different ways of using that filter, which is really cool. Now, we're actually going to be using Bleach Bypass here because one of the most important things of creating a matte look that a lot of people miss is making sure that you've got nice contrast in your image. A lot of people just apply a matte look to a flat image and it ends up looking even muddier and even worse. You lose detail and it looks so flat. So the Bleach Bypass filter, along with things like the Dynamic Contrast filter, are great ways to apply contrast and maintain detail all at once. So we're going to use the Bleach Bypass here, and I'm just going to click on this top normal preset, and we'll go ahead and apply that. Now, on the right-hand side in the Filter Options pane, I can go through and I can make adjustments to this. So for the Bleach Bypass, I tend to like to back off on the amount a little bit. I like to adjust the brightness according to the image, so sometimes I'll need to lighten or darken. Most of the images that I shot for this shoot were a little dark, so I'm going to brighten this. And then you can apply even more contrast here, but I'm going to leave that alone. What's also really nice is there's a detail slider here, and I definitely want to use this because all of these images could probably use a little bit of detail. So by moving that over to the right, we're going to crisp up some of the edges and make it appear a little bit sharper. You can adjust saturation here as well. This image is really well saturated. I'm going to leave it alone. And then I also am going to avoid using the tint slider down at the bottom because we're going to apply a color styling a little bit later. What we need to do next is once we added this nice contrast, which I'll show you the before and after really quickly. This is the flatter image out of Browse, and this is with Bleach Bypass. A lot crisper, a lot brighter, a lot more contrasty. Now we're going to apply the matte styling. Now over in the filter stack, click that plus button down on the bottom left to add another empty filter, and then we'll go down to the Filter Options pane, and this time I'm just going to choose exactly what I want. I don't need to go over to the filter library on the left. I'm just going to choose the tone enhancer. Now, the tone enhancer will automatically apply adjustments to your image and try and auto-tone the entire photo. So it's going to work with brightness, contrast, shadow, and highlight recovery, all those kinds of fun things to try and fix your image. I already like the contrast where it is, so I want to turn the auto button off. What we really need to be working with is the tone curve all the way down at the bottom. And this is one of the most underrated tools here inside Effects. I think it's one of the best parts of using the program, but a lot of people don't know about it or know how to use it. All it is a graphic representation of the tones in your photo. You can actually use these little gradients on the left and bottom as cheat sheets for understanding how the tone curve works. Anything that goes on down at the bottom here is going to affect your shadows, which is why you've got that kind of black tone down there. Anything in the middle of this right here is going to affect your midtones, which is where the gray is. And then on the top right are going to be your highlights. What we need to do is raise our shadows so that they're not black, they're a nice charcoal gray, and then lower our highlights so they're kind of a soft, very, very light gray. To do that, there are actually little dots on the bottom left and top right to indicate where those shadows and highlights are. So I'm going to click on that dot on the bottom left where the shadows are, and we are going to drag it up. Now when we do that, the entire image is getting brighter. You'll see that this line has gone up, which means that the shadows have gotten lighter, the midtones have gotten lighter, everything has gotten brighter in the image. The same thing will happen when we play around with the highlights. If we click and drag that dot down a little bit, all of these tones right here are getting darker, all of these tones are getting lighter. The biggest problem that people run into when creating matte looks is the fact that they leave this line the way that it is. You've eradicated all of that great contrast, a lot of the detail that you added in there, and now your photo looks really flat. So to maintain the contrast of the image while still keeping a matte look, you need to actually add more dots or points on your tone curve here. So to do that, you can just click on the line and it'll add another dot for you. And then you can drop it down to darken the image or bring it up to lighten the image. It's very, very easy. Down is dark, up is bright. Now what we need to do is bring this down closer to where the central line that goes diagonally across this graph is. What that's doing is it's taking all of these tones that we accidentally made lighter when we pushed our shadows up, and we're bringing it back down to create some of that darker contrast, but we're still getting those beautiful charcoal grays. We're going to do the same thing in the top right-hand corner with the lights. We're going to click and drag up. All of those brights are going to be nice and bright, but they're still going to have that soft gray tone on them. Once we've played around with our tone curve, we're going to go back up to the filter stack and click the plus button one more time. This is when we add our color styling. Once we've worked with our tones, then we can play around with the colors we want to add to the image. Just like before, you can either go to the left, scroll to the bottom of the filters pane, and choose one of the split tones that already exists, or you can go over to the right in the filter options pane and you can just select it from there. When it comes to split tones, you get to apply a color to the highlights and the shadows. And a lot of times it'll start you off at blue-orange. So orange for the highlights, blue for the shadows. This is not at all what I'm going for. I want to add kind of a buttery yellow color to the highlights and a teal color to the shadows. So we'll open up the highlight color just by clicking on the swatch. I'm going to click and drag around here until I find the color that I'm looking for. I want it to be that very kind of bright, soft yellow, and we'll go ahead and click OK. And the same thing with the shadows. I'm going to click inside that dialog there, and we're going to find kind of a dark teal. So we'll go ahead and make that a little bit darker there, and we'll go ahead and click, make it even darker, and we'll click OK. Now, the amount sliders just adjust how intense those colors are in your image. So if you move them over to the right, you're going to eradicate a lot of the color from your original image. So be very careful with how intense these sliders are. The other thing that's really important about the split tone is your mode. If you open up the mode drop-down menu, there are different ways for these colors to interact with your underlying image. Right now it's set to color, which means it's leaving the tones in your photo alone and just applying these colors as colors. It's eradicating slowly. As you move those amount sliders to the right, it's eradicating all of those original colors and replacing them with the yellow and the teal that we added. One of my favorite modes here is normal. And what that does is it applies these colors, and if I move the amount sliders over to 100, it'll make a lot more sense. You're basically creating a duotone of your image. You'll see all of the highlights are that soft buttery yellow. It's eradicated both the color and the tones that we created, and the same goes for the shadows. Those charcoal grays are gone. It's completely replaced it with our new teal shadow color. Now the difference between mode and normal makes a lot more sense when you play around and you look at both of them. This is what it looks like when you apply them with a normal mode. This is what it looks like when you apply them with color. You'll notice that under normal, the image is a lot brighter, and it's because it's pulling from the tones of the colors we chose here in the split tone. I really like normal because this is also a really great way to create a soft matte look. All we're going to do is we're going to leave these here. We're just going to move the amount slider back over closer to like 20-ish, and that looks a lot better. We're lightening the shadows and darkening the highlights even more, but it's very, very soft and very subtle. Now once we're done here, I'm going to go up to the top of my screen and save this as a preset. Up in the preset drop-down menu, just choose Save Preset. I'm going to call this Matte Yellow Teal so that I can remember what it is. If you don't have any categories of your own presets, you can click to add a new one. So we'll just call this one Matte Looks. I create a lot of these, so I might as well make a category for it. We'll go ahead and click OK. And then you can also type in a creator and a description if you'd like to. We'll go ahead and click Create. Now I'm going to save and close this image, and we'll process it and bring it back to Perfect Browse. And I can batch process all of the same photos inside this folder so that they all will have the same look. I'm just going to click and select a whole bunch of the images that I want to apply this to. I've got all those images chosen. I'm going to go up to the File menu and scroll down to Batch. Under the Batch Processing dialog box, you need to click to add a module, and from here choose Perfect Effects. This is where your preset resides. What's great is I only have a couple presets in here, so underneath Type, you'll also notice that you can choose things, not just your own presets, but on-one presets and just plain filters, which is super cool. We'll choose My Presets. You can choose your category and the preset you'd like to apply. Down below will be your destination pane. This is also really important. You want to save to your current location typically so that your original and your after photo will be side by side. And then you can play around with things like changing the file type. Maybe I want them to be JPEGs, and the color space. Maybe I want to change my color space and use that sRGB so I can place them up online a little bit faster. I'm going to go ahead and just click OK. It's going to process all of those images, and it's going to jump right back here into Browse, so I don't have to spend a lot of time waiting for all of this to happen. At the end, it is going to let you know that there were no errors while it was processing, which is really great, so it didn't run into any problems. And when I click Close, I'll be able to see all of my before and after images. So if I click on my first photo here, I can take a closer look, and I can go through and view all of my before and afters. You can see one right after the other, each one of these images. I really like that preset. It works really well on these photos. It unifies them in a wonderful way. And what's great is even if all of these photos, maybe there's one or two that you don't necessarily like. This one didn't take the preset as well as I want. I can bring it back into effects and apply a different filter. I can start again from scratch. I can take it into another program, like maybe this would be a great option to use perfect black and white. So I have lots of different ways for editing my images. I tend to really like it when they're all unified like this, but if you don't, you still have lots of other options for ways that you can mix and match all of your photos for things like blog posts, portfolio sections on your website, and a lot more.